"Why don't you leave me alone, human?" the alien queen yelled in fury. Elias was used to the hum of a cargo ship's engines and the routine of trade stations. It was all the same, different faces, the same old transactions. But this time, as he docked at the sprawling orbital station called Kepler's Reach, something felt different. He couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't the new cargo he had to deliver or the slight rumble of the station as it was repaired from an earlier attack. It was something in the air, something almost intangible, that caught his attention as he disembarked. Kepler's Reach was a busy place, an intergalactic trade hub situated between several star systems. The station was vast, with sprawling halls and corridors where traders, diplomats, and soldiers from all parts of the galaxy rubbed shoulders. Elias had been to Kepler's Reach before, but today it felt different. His cargo was a simple delivery, rare ores from the asteroid belt. Nothing important. He had planned to unload it quickly, grab a drink at the bar, and get back to his ship. But then he saw her. She wasn't someone he'd normally notice, not at first. She was standing alone in the marketplace, scanning a display panel as if looking for something specific. She had long, dark hair that shimmered with a hint of purple, and her skin had a soft violet hue. She wasn't exactly tall, but her posture, the way she held herself, made her seem more than just another face in the crowd. Elias was used to seeing all sorts of alien species, reptilians, insectoids, even beings made entirely of gas. But there was something about her that made him pause. He noticed how the people around her gave her a wide berth, stepping out of her way without even realizing it. A slight chill ran through him. She was dressed in simple, elegant clothing, nothing flashy, yet she carried herself as if she were more than what she appeared. Elias shook off the feeling and approached her, trying to get a better look. She didn't seem to notice him until he was standing a few feet away. She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze with a calm, almost serene expression. "I don't believe I've seen you around before," Elias said, offering a polite smile. He didn't want to appear rude, but his curiosity was piqued. The woman's eyes were a deep shade of silver, calm but piercing, as if they could see right through him. "I don't come here often," she replied, her voice soft but clear. There was an accent to it, something almost musical, though it wasn't from any language Elias recognized. She continued, "I'm just passing through." Elias was intrigued. Her voice, despite its strange cadence, was soothing. There was something about her that didn't quite match her appearance. He decided to take a chance. "Would you like to grab a drink?" he asked, the words coming out before he had time to think. For a moment, the woman simply stared at him as if considering his offer. Then she gave a small nod, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "I would enjoy that." They made their way to the station's bar, a cozy place near the docking bays where pilots and traders often congregated. Elias led the way, trying to ignore the feeling that they were being watched. As they entered the bar, the usual buzz of conversation and clinking glasses seemed to quiet, just slightly. Elias couldn't put his finger on it, but something about the way the room fell silent felt intentional. They sat at a table near the back, away from the main crowd. Elias ordered a drink and glanced at his companion, who was now studying the bar's menu with interest. She was silent for a moment before looking up, her silver eyes meeting his. "You are a trader, yes?" she asked, her voice still calm and collected. Elias nodded. "Yeah, mostly. Cargo runs, mostly ore and raw materials. I'm just here for a quick stop before heading out to my next job." "I see," she replied. There was something in the way she said it that made Elias feel like she was studying him, not just listening. After a long pause, she asked, "What do you know of this station?" Elias blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Not much more than what I told you. It's a hub for traders, mercenaries, and diplomats. Not much more to it. Why?" Her gaze didn't waver. "What if I told you that this place and everyone in it is connected in ways you cannot understand?" The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Elias wasn't sure if she was speaking figuratively or if there was some deeper meaning behind her words. He opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by the sound of the bar's door sliding open. A group of soldiers entered. Elias didn't think much of it at first, but as he glanced up, his eyes narrowed. There were too many of them, 5, all armed, all wearing the same dark armor. They weren't the usual mercenaries you saw around stations like this. These men moved with a purpose, like they were on a mission. They stopped short as they entered the room. Elias could see them scanning the bar, their eyes quickly settling on the woman sitting across from him. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, without warning, all 5 soldiers dropped to one knee in unison, their heads bowed low in reverence. Elias' heart skipped a beat. What the hell? The woman's expression didn't change, but Elias could feel the weight of the room shift. The soldiers' actions weren't the kind of respectful bow he'd seen before. No, this was different. This was deferential, almost worshipful. The lead soldier, a tall man with a scar running down his face, spoke in a low, respectful tone. "Your Majesty, we await your orders." Elias' blood ran cold. His gaze flicked between the soldiers and the woman across from him. The words didn't make sense. "Your Majesty." Was this woman some kind of royal figure? Before he could gather his thoughts, the soldiers stood, but they remained in their formation, watching the woman closely. She didn't seem to acknowledge them immediately, but the air around her had changed. "Rise," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. The soldiers stood, but they didn't move, their gazes fixed on her as if awaiting further instructions. Elias was stunned. He looked at the woman, and for the first time he wondered if he had been wrong about her from the beginning. She wasn't just some diplomat or high-ranking official. There was something more to her, something that commanded this kind of respect. But what? And why hadn't she told him? The woman turned to Elias, her calm demeanor returning as if nothing unusual had just happened. She smiled softly. "I must apologize. My presence seems to have caused a disturbance." Elias was still trying to process what he had just witnessed. You're a queen," the words slipped out before he could stop himself. She didn't answer immediately, instead sipping from her drink as if she were deciding how to respond. Finally, she said, "I am someone important, yes, but not in the way you think." The soldiers began to disperse, clearly waiting for her next command. Elias watched as they moved, taking up positions around the bar, still watching her as though she were the center of their universe. But his mind was elsewhere. She had said it. Someone important? She didn't need to say more. Elias knew without a doubt that this woman was more than she appeared. She wasn't just some alien. She was the queen of an empire, one that Elias had unknowingly crossed paths with. As he sat back in his chair, his mind raced. He had thought she was just another mysterious figure, but now he knew the truth. And the truth was far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. What did this mean for him, for his life? He didn't know. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. The next few days on Kepler's Reach felt different for Elias. What had started as a casual encounter with an intriguing woman had turned into something far more complex. It wasn't just her quiet, composed demeanor that stood out anymore. It was the way others reacted to her. Elias had never given much thought to the politics of the galaxy, but now he couldn't help but feel drawn into something far bigger than himself. After their initial meeting, Serafina, he had learned her name over the following hours, had been hard to find. Dee slipped away from the bar that night with little more than a polite nod and a promise that they would meet again. And meet again they did, though their interactions were brief. Every time Elias saw her, she seemed to be surrounded by new faces, always with soldiers, always with that same calm, almost regal presence. Elias tried to keep his distance. He was just a pilot, after all. Just a cargo man used to traveling through the stars with no interest in the complexities of galactic politics. But something about Serafina called to him. Maybe it was her mystery. Maybe it was her quiet strength. Maybe it was because no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much larger than himself. One evening, he was returning to his ship after a long day of waiting for the cargo manifest to clear, and there she was again, standing near the docking bays. She wasn't alone this time. A few of her guards stood a few paces behind her, their eyes scanning the area with military precision. But it wasn't the guards that caught Elias' attention, it was Serafina herself. She had a look on her face that told him something was different. He hesitated for a moment, watching her in the dim light of the station, unsure of what to do. But then, as if sensing his presence, Serafina turned and looked directly at him. Her eyes met his with that same calm intensity, and this time there was no evading the connection. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Elias," she said, her voice cool yet warm at the same time, "I knew you would come." He walked over, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, feeling awkward. "I just saw you standing here." "You were looking for me?" she interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "It's no coincidence. I've been waiting for you." Elias frowned, confusion settling in. Waiting for me? I'm just a cargo pilot. You've got more important things to do. Serafina shook her head. You're not just a cargo pilot, Elias. You're much more than that, and we both know it. The words hit him like a blow, though he couldn't quite understand why. His life had been simple until now: take the job, deliver the goods, get paid. But somehow it all seemed irrelevant when Serafina looked at him like that. Why me? Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want with someone like me? She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You don't understand yet, but you will. I've been watching you for some time, Elias. You've made an impact, even if you didn't realize it. Impact? He raised an eyebrow, confused. I'm just a guy who gets shipments from one place to another. Serafina smiled again, but this time it wasn't just a polite curve of her lips. It was a smile that conveyed knowledge, knowledge of something far greater than the simple job Elias had been doing. You've crossed paths with people in this galaxy, Elias. People who have been watching you. Your actions have drawn attention, good attention and bad attention. Her voice lowered as she continued. What you don't know is that you've been serving a purpose without even realizing it. Elias' head spun. He couldn't make sense of it. The woman who had captivated him from the moment they met seemed to know everything about him, but he knew next to nothing about her. What was she really trying to tell him? I don't get it, he admitted. Why me? Why not someone else? Serafina hesitated before answering. The silence between them was heavy, as if the weight of the universe itself was pressing down on their conversation. You're different, Elias, she said finally, her voice softer now. You're not like the others. You face danger, yet you keep moving forward. You've seen the darkness in this galaxy, and still you try to do what's right. There are very few people like that, very few who could stand beside me. Elias felt a chill run through him at her words. Was she asking him to join her? It seemed too much to believe. She was a queen, the leader of an empire. What could someone like him offer? Before he could voice his doubts, she continued, her expression turning serious. I'm building something, Elias, an empire. Not just for my people, but for all the people who have been oppressed, crushed beneath the weight of corrupt governments and tyrants. My enemies are powerful, and they will stop at nothing to destroy me. But I believe that with you by my side, we can change the future. The idea was too grand to comprehend, too much for Elias to grasp in that moment. He had never imagined himself in a position like this, let alone standing at the side of an alien queen, fighting for something so monumental. Yet in her eyes he could see the truth of her words. She wasn't just talking about power or war. She was talking about hope. Elias took a step back, trying to think. The weight of her words pressed down on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling him in. He had lived a quiet life until now, one that was simple, predictable. But with Serafina, everything had changed. What are you asking of me? He finally said, his voice uncertain. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. I'm asking you to stand with me, to fight with me. I can't do this alone, Elias. My people need someone like you, a leader. Someone who understands what it means to fight for the right cause. The words hit him hard, though he didn't know why. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a fighter. He was just a man who had spent most of his life hauling cargo across the stars. But as Serafina looked at him, he felt something shift inside of him. A part of him, deep down, wanted to believe in her vision, wanted to be part of something bigger. You're asking a lot, he said, his voice low. I know, she replied, her gaze unwavering. But I believe you can do it. I've seen what you're capable of. The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation, and Elias glanced around. A group of soldiers had approached, their armor gleaming in the dim light. They didn't look at him as they passed, their eyes focused entirely on Serafina. One of the soldiers, a tall man with sharp features, stepped forward and bowed slightly. Your Majesty, he said respectfully, the council is waiting for you. Elias' stomach twisted at the word majesty. It was one thing to know that she was a queen, but another to hear it from someone else. There was no denying it now. Serafina was more than she had let on. She was a leader, a ruler with the power to command entire armies. Serafina glanced at the soldier and nodded. I'll be there shortly, she said, her voice calm but commanding. Then she turned back to Elias, a small smile playing on her lips. I must go now, she said, but think about what I've said. We'll meet again soon. You'll have to make a choice, Elias. I can't do this without you, but the decision is yours. Elias stood there, watching as Serafina turned and walked away, her guards falling in line behind her. His mind raced with questions. What had he just agreed to? Was he really ready to join her cause? He didn't know, but one thing was certain: nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Elias couldn't stop thinking about Serafina. Even days after their conversation in the docking bays, her words haunted him. He had always been content with his simple life, a cargo pilot, a man who moved things from one place to another. But now everything had changed. Serafina's offer lingered in his mind. She had asked him to join her to fight for something greater than himself. And for the first time in a long while, Elias wondered if he had been living in the shadows of something far bigger than he could have imagined. He went back to his ship and tried to return to his normal routine, but nothing felt the same. The quiet hum of the engines, the routine loading and unloading of cargo, the simple tasks that once filled his days, all of it seemed meaningless now. The galaxy, with its sprawling empires, ancient powers, and hidden agendas, suddenly felt too vast, too dangerous to ignore. And Serafina, the calm, collected woman who had captured his attention, was at the center of it all. The days passed slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. Elias found himself on the edge, unsure of what to do. Should he stay out of it? Should he continue his life as a simple trader? Or should he take the risk, stand by Serafina's side, and become part of the galaxy's larger story? He didn't know. But one thing was certain: he couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. He had seen enough now to know that his life, his choices, mattered. And whether he liked it or not, he was already part of something much bigger. On the 5th day after their last meeting, Elias received a message from Serafina. It was brief, just a simple invitation to meet her in one of the quieter sectors of Kepler's reach. No details, no explanations, just an invitation. He didn't need any more than that. Without hesitation, he set his course. When he arrived, the quiet sector was nothing like the bustling parts of the station he had grown accustomed to. This part of Kepler's reach was isolated, far from the crowded halls and noisy marketplaces. There were no traders, no guards, no crowds. Just a series of narrow corridors that led to a small, dimly lit room. Elias stepped inside, feeling the weight of the silence press down on him. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a table and a few chairs. At the far end of the room stood Serafina, her silver eyes glowing softly in the low light. She was alone. For the first time, Elias saw her without the presence of her guards or the other members of her entourage. "Elias," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you for coming," he nodded, trying to shake off the nervous tension in his chest. "You wanted to talk," he said, his voice sounding louder in the empty space than he intended. "I did," she replied. "There's much you need to understand before you make your decision." Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her closely, trying to gauge her intentions. He had learned a lot about her in the days since their last meeting. She was a queen, a leader of an empire that had been in hiding for centuries. Her people, the Elysians, were one of the most advanced and powerful species in the galaxy, but their empire had fallen to ruin after a series of brutal wars with other factions. Serafina was the last of her kind, and she was determined to rebuild what had been lost. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Elias admitted. "About the galaxy, your empire, everything." "And what have you decided?" Serafina asked, her gaze unwavering. Elias hesitated. "I don't know, it's a lot to take in. I've lived my whole life in the shadows, just moving cargo from one place to another. I never asked for any of this." Serafina stepped closer, her expression softening. "I know, but I believe you were meant for something greater, Elias. You have a strength inside you that you don't even realize, and that strength is needed if we're going to succeed." Elias could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that there was something more for him, something beyond the quiet life he had always known. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to take the leap. He had no experience in war, no knowledge of the politics that governed the galaxy, and no desire to become a soldier. What could he possibly offer to someone like Serafina? "I'm just a cargo pilot," he said again, his voice filled with doubt. "What could I do for you? What could I do for your empire?" Serafina looked at him with a mixture of understanding and determination. "It's not about what you can do, it's about what you will do. You've already proven yourself capable, Elias. You've already shown that you can think on your feet and adapt to difficult situations. That's what I need. Someone who can see the big picture and act when it matters." Elias felt his heart race. She was asking him to be something he wasn't sure he could be. But there was no denying the truth in her words. He had faced challenges in his life, many of them dangerous, and he had always found a way to survive. But this was different. This was a cause, a purpose far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Serafina took another step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know this is hard for you. I know it's not easy to leave behind everything you've ever known. But this is the only chance we have to take back what was lost. To give my people and the people of this galaxy a chance at something better. Elias stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. The decision was too big, too important. How could he possibly choose? He wasn't a leader. He didn't want to be a leader. He just wanted to live his life. But the more he looked at Serafina, the more he saw the conviction in her eyes, the more he realized that this wasn't something he could ignore. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Serafina reached out, her hand brushing his arm gently. You are, she said softly. I believe in you, Elias. I believe in what you can do, and together we can rebuild the galaxy. We can create something new. Elias stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The path ahead was unclear, uncertain. There were no guarantees, but as he stood there, facing Serafina, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that still lingered in his chest. Serafina smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. You won't regret it. Elias wasn't so sure about that. But one thing was certain. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly understand. And no matter what happened, there was no turning back now. The days after Elias made his decision blurred together in a haze of preparation. It was a strange feeling, one he had never known before. For most of his life, he had only been concerned with the small details of survival, making sure his cargo arrived on time, keeping his ship in one piece, staying out of trouble. But now, everything had shifted. There was a purpose to his actions, a weight to his choices that he couldn't shake. Serafina had kept her word. She began to slowly introduce him to the world he had just stepped into, showing him the ins and outs of her plans, the scope of the empire she hoped to rebuild. It wasn't as simple as just taking back power. It was about freeing an entire galaxy from the grasp of corrupt, oppressive forces that had been in control for too long. The first thing Serafina made clear was that she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, people she could trust. And now, Elias had become one of them. She didn't just want him for his strength or his skills, though she'd made it clear that those would come in handy. She wanted him for his mind, his ability to think outside the box, to see solutions where others only saw obstacles. As much as Elias had wanted to avoid becoming involved in something so grand, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. There was something in the way she spoke about her vision, about the people she wanted to help, that made him believe in her cause. It wasn't about power for her or personal gain. It was about justice and righting the wrongs that had been done to countless innocent beings across the galaxy. It wasn't long before Elias began to see the depths of Serafina's reach. They started to travel to different planets, meeting with representatives of various factions, some allies, some enemies. The more Elias saw, the more he realized just how vast and complicated the situation was. He was introduced to members of Serafina's inner circle, leaders from various worlds, each with their own reasons for joining the Queen's cause. Some had been exiled from their home planets, others had lost family and friends to the ruthless ruling factions that controlled vast sectors of space. But they all had one thing in common. They were tired of being pushed around. They were tired of living in fear. And they all believed in Serafina's vision. Elias wasn't sure what he expected when he first agreed to help, but it certainly wasn't this. He had imagined speeches, plans drawn out on holographic tables, and plenty of discussions about tactics. And while there were moments like that, what stood out to him the most was the feeling of camaraderie, the bond that was forming between Serafina's allies. They weren't just fighting for a cause, they were fighting for each other for a better future. One evening, as the group was gathered around a long table discussing their next move, Elias found himself seated across from Serafina. The others were deep in conversation about their military strategy, but Elias was distracted, his mind still working through everything he had learned in the past few days. Serafina noticed his silence. She had always been keenly aware of him, as though she could read his thoughts with a single glance. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice gentle but knowing. What's on your mind? Elias hesitated, unsure of how to voice the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. I've been thinking about how quickly things are changing. I'm not used to this. I'm just a cargo pilot, Serafina. I don't know anything about armies or rebellions. I've never led anyone. Serafina's gaze softened, and she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You don't need to be a leader, Elias. You've already proven that you can lead by example. Your strength, your resilience, those are the qualities that matter. You've faced adversity and you've survived. That's more than enough. Elias looked down at the table, feeling the weight of her words. He was right, of course. He had faced more than his share of danger, and somehow he had always come out on top. But this wasn't just about survival. This was about something far bigger than him. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Elias admitted, his voice low. I'm not sure I can handle all of it. You're stronger than you think, Serafina said softly, her voice reassuring. And you don't have to do it alone. You have us. We're all in this together. For a moment, Elias allowed himself to believe her. It wasn't just her words that comforted him, but the sincerity in her eyes, the belief she had in him. And in that moment, he knew that he couldn't turn back. He had made his choice, and there was no going back now. The galaxy needed change, and Serafina needed him. The next few days were a blur of travel and meetings. They visited several planets, some on the edge of the galaxy, others in the heart of enemy territory. Elias was introduced to military strategies, political maneuvering, and the subtle art of negotiation. He had never considered himself a fighter, but now he found himself immersed in a world where every decision had consequences, where every move could mean life or death. It wasn't long before Elias was called upon to take part in a mission, one that would test his resolve and his ability to adapt. Serafina and her allies had learned of a secret meeting between two powerful factions, one of which was an ally, the other an enemy. The meeting was set to take place on a neutral planet, and Serafina wanted to intercept it, to learn what the enemy was planning and to gather information that could turn the tide in their favor. Elias' role in the mission was simple. He was to act as a neutral party, someone who could gather intelligence without arousing suspicion. He would be sent to the meeting disguised as a trader, his cargo hold filled with goods meant for exchange. It was a risky mission, but Serafina had faith in him. She knew that he could blend in, that he could navigate the complex politics of the situation without drawing attention to himself. The night before the mission, Elias stood on the observation deck of the station, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space always had a way of making him feel small, but tonight it felt different. The stars seemed brighter, as if they were watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He could feel the weight of the decision he had made settling in, but there was something else there, too, something he couldn't quite place. Are you ready? Serafina's voice came from behind him. Elias turned, surprised to see her standing there. I think so, he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. She smiled, stepping closer. You don't have to do this alone, remember that. Elias nodded, his gaze returning to the stars. I won't forget. The mission began the next day. Elias and a small team of Serafina's trusted allies traveled to the neutral planet where the meeting was scheduled to take place. The planet was a barren rock, its surface scarred by past battles, but it was the perfect location for covert meetings. As they landed, Elias could feel the tension in the air. The mission was risky, but it was necessary. Every piece of information they could gather would bring them one step closer to the victory they so desperately needed. As Elias entered the meeting hall, his heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't used to being in situations like this, but he had learned quickly that there was no room for hesitation. He was here for a reason, and that reason was far bigger than himself. The meeting went as planned, at first. Elias sat quietly, observing the exchange between the factions, his mind working to absorb every detail. But as the conversation began to turn toward military strategy, something shifted. One of the enemy representatives, an imposing figure cloaked in shadow, glanced directly at Elias, his eyes narrowing. For a brief moment, Elias felt exposed. He quickly looked away, but the tension in the room was palpable. He had to stay calm. He had to blend in. Just as he thought the situation might spiral out of control, Serafina's ally, a sharp-eyed woman named Lyra, signaled him from across the room. Without thinking, Elias stood and walked toward her, his footsteps steady. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, but he didn't falter. He had a job to do. And as the meeting continued, Elias knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just a cargo pilot anymore. He was part of something much bigger, and he wasn't going to back down. Elias had never felt more out of his depth. The meeting had gone smoothly, or at least, that's what he tried to convince himself as he made his way back to the shuttle. The enemy representative hadn't seemed suspicious, but the icy feeling in the pit of his stomach told him something wasn't right. There had been a moment, a glance, just a fraction of a second, where he'd felt like he was being sized up, like they knew exactly who he was. The mission wasn't over, and Elias knew that. There was still work to be done, still information to gather. But as he boarded the shuttle and left the barren planet behind, the nagging feeling of uncertainty refused to fade. The team was quiet on the return flight. They'd secured the intelligence they needed, but Elias could tell they were all just as tense as he was. They'd been so close to danger, so close to being caught, that the adrenaline hadn't yet worn off. As the shuttle docked with Kepler's reach, Elias couldn't help but think back to the first time he'd arrived at the station. Back then, he had been a simple trader, a man with no worries beyond his cargo and his next job. But now, everything had changed. He was a part of something far larger than himself, and every choice he made seemed to carry the weight of the galaxy. The shuttle doors opened, and Elias stepped off, followed by the rest of the team. Serafina was waiting for them, her silver eyes scanning each of them as they approached. Her gaze lingered on Elias for a moment longer than the others, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of it. "You did well," she said, her voice calm but warm. "All of you. The information we've gathered will be invaluable." Elias nodded, but his mind was still on the meeting. There had been something off about the way the enemy representative had looked at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that their cover had been blown. "We got the information you wanted," Elias said, keeping his tone steady. "But I'm not sure we were as inconspicuous as we thought." Serafina raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "There was a moment during the meeting. One of them, he looked right at me. Not like a casual glance, but like he knew who I was." Elias paused, searching her face for any sign of concern. "What if they know we're here? What if they're onto us?" Serafina's expression remained unchanged, though Elias could see the brief flicker of concern in her eyes. "I don't believe they know," she said slowly. "But it's possible they suspected something. You'll need to stay vigilant. We can't afford to make mistakes now." Her words did little to ease the unease in Elias' chest, but he nodded in agreement. He had no choice but to trust her. The following days were filled with planning and preparations. They moved quickly, using the information they'd gathered to anticipate the enemy's next move. Elias spent most of his time working with Serafina's team, learning the ins and outs of their plans, and becoming more involved in the strategy. He wasn't just a cargo pilot anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. As the weeks passed, Elias' role became more defined. He helped coordinate missions, worked with the intelligence team to decrypt intercepted communications, and even started to assist in training some of Serafina's new recruits. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt like he was in over his head, but he kept going because he believed in the cause. He believed in Serafina, but the enemy wasn't blind. They were patient, and they had spies everywhere. Elias' fears were realized one day when he received a message from one of Serafina's most trusted allies, Lyra. The message was short, but it was enough to make Elias' heart stop. "Elias, we've been compromised. They know you're here. They're coming for you." Elias immediately sought out Serafina, his mind racing. The feeling of being hunted was a constant undercurrent now, and it was finally coming to a head. He found her in the command center, poring over a holographic map of the galaxy. She looked up as he approached, her face betraying no emotion, though Elias could see the subtle tension in her posture. "They know," Elias said, his voice low. "They're coming for me." Serafina stood up, her eyes meeting his with unwavering determination. "Then we'll make sure they don't get to you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of action. Serafina's soldiers moved quickly, preparing defenses, organizing evacuation plans, and setting up safe routes in case they needed to flee. But Elias could see that there was something different in the air. This wasn't just a precautionary measure. This was serious. The enemy had found them. Elias wasn't sure what to expect. Part of him wanted to run, to get back to the simple life he had known. But the other part of him, the part that had come to believe in Serafina and her cause, couldn't turn his back now. Where do I fit into all this? Elias asked, his mind still racing. Serafina gave him a hard look as if assessing him. You're not running, Elias. You become part of this, and now you have a choice to make. Do you stand with us or do you walk away? The question hung in the air between them, heavier than any weapon. Elias looked at her, his mind racing. It wasn't about the danger anymore. It wasn't about the risk to his life. It was about the people, the innocent lives they were fighting for. It was about the galaxy that Serafina dreamed of building, one where oppression was a thing of the past, and justice wasn't a dream but a reality. I'm with you, Elias said, his voice steady. Serafina nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. Good, then let's finish this. The enemy's forces arrived sooner than expected, and what followed was chaos. The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls of the station as Serafina's forces clashed with the enemy. The battle wasn't just fought with weapons, it was fought with strategy, with intellect. Elias found himself in the thick of it, his heart pounding as he helped coordinate the defense, using the skills he had learned over the past few weeks. He wasn't just a pilot anymore, he was a soldier, a leader in his own right. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Elias thought they might lose, but through it all, Serafina remained calm, her leadership unwavering. She was the heart of the resistance, and as long as she was standing, they would fight. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Elias had never seen anything like it before. He had been in danger before, had seen death up close, but this was different. This was a war for the future. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the enemy forces began to retreat. The remaining soldiers scattered, retreating into the depths of space, no doubt planning their next move. But for now, they had won. For now, they had survived. Elias stood among the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body ached, his mind was foggy, but there was a sense of relief in the air. They had done it. They had pushed back the enemy, and they had done it together. Serafina walked toward him, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She looked tired, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fire that Elias had come to admire. You did well, she said, her voice low but filled with gratitude. You didn't back down when it mattered. Elias looked at her, his heart pounding. I didn't do it alone. We did it together, she smiled, her gaze softening. That's the truth of it. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. And as Elias looked out at the battlefield, at the people who had stood by him through it all, he realized that this wasn't just a fight for a better galaxy. This was a fight for everything he had come to care about. His life, his purpose, it was all tied to this cause now. There was no turning back.